Hello and welcome to Trans Norge, a podcast by and for transgender people in Norway, run by the patient organization for gender incongruence. My name is Aleksander L, and in this episode I talk with Aleksander Linkowski. Aleksander lived for several years as a transgender woman, undergoing both hormone replacement therapy and genital surgery before going back to living as a man. Earlier this year, he received a lot of media attention after going public about his story of detransition, surgical complications, and increasing skepticism towards some forms of gender-affirming care. Since we here in Trans Norge don't have a lot of faith in the media when it comes to transgender topics, we decided that we'd love to hear directly from Aleksander himself, and luckily he said yes to come on our podcast and tell his story. While it is no secret that we disagree on many things, this episode is not intended to be or structured as a debate or a political discussion. Rather, this episode is a conversation between me and Aleksander about his current thoughts around detransition, regret, gender, and sexuality. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope you enjoy. But yeah, thank you so much for coming.
Well, it's my pleasure, of course.
Maybe you could just start with just like quickly introducing yourself, like your name, and if you have any thoughts around pronouns as well.
Yeah, sure. So my name is Aleksander Linkowski. I'm what I usually would call a detransitioned male. Personally, I don't really like the word detransitioner. Like, a sort of like, maybe you can relate to that, but just for the practicing, like for practical reasons, when I would refer to you, I would just call you a man, not a trans man, even though, well, factually, you are a trans man, right? But for simplicity's sake, I wouldn't do that. So I don't like go around calling myself a detransitioner. But, if you want get attention around this topic, well, algorithms are oriented so that you have to use that term in order for it to get any attention at all. And I think it's an important topic. It's not my favorite topic, but so yeah, I prefer the detransitioned male to detransitioner. And well, pronouns, I don't use any pronouns. So
Okay.
as I'm like, you can call me whatever you want, right? Because
Okay.
my take on it is that it's not up to me to decide what other people want to call me. So I just let people call me whatever they want. And also, I don't identify as anything. Like, I don't identify as a man or a woman. I accept like my biological reality as a male, but beyond that, I think we should move like beyond gender, just transcend it completely. And I see you have three categories of people, or actually two usually. Those who are so trapped in this biological way of viewing sex, and then there's a group of people like a lot of trans people who like, sort of transcended sex and are on this gender level. And I moved even beyond that, you could say. Like I wish for a post-gender society where we like don't think about it and we just exist, and be happy.
Yeah, I mean, kind of the same, I guess. I mean, I'm not a detransitioner, but
You should
I
try
don't-
it. You might like it.
I don't think so. Even though I feel like I don't have that strong of a gender identity as I used to have. But I do think that for me has more to do with just the fact that I'm like really comfortable in my body. And so when I'm very comfortable in my body, it kind of becomes more neutral. And so that idea of constantly like feeling like a man or feeling like something kind of goes away. But for the people who are listening, how would you like define like detrans or like detransitioner? Because that term is used like a little bit people use it in different ways, right? Sometimes people like include the sisters,
Yes.
and sometimes they don't.
Well, it's like the main difference between a desister and a detransitioner is a desister is something who didn't go on hormones or didn't have any surgeries, just live socially as the opposite gender, and sort of detransition or desisted. Whereas a detransitioner is used for people who have actually been either on hormones or had surgeries. Personally, I don't really use the word desister. Like, I never ever use it. So, I think that there is not like one right way to detransition, just like I don't think there's like one correct way to transition. And I think we should move away from this sort of thinking that, well, in order to transition, you have to take hormones, you have to do those surgeries. I think a lot of people can be happy either with just being on hormones and even without taking hormones, just transitioning socially. I think it's so individual, and it's the same case with detransitioning. Like, I know people who have detransitioned who still take estrogen, who still present female, but they have detransitioned. Like, they no longer they're like no longer calling themselves a woman. Let's say they're like go back to calling themselves a man. They detransitioned in that way. So there is like not one right way to do that. And also, a lot of people telling me that I haven't really detransitioned because I'm not on testosterone, right? And I think that's really, really stupid. And then there are people who are just asking me, when are you going to get the like recreation surgery, right? And well, the thing is, like, I've learned my lesson with surgeries. I think there's a lot of danger to that, and I think that the results you get are really, really not worth it, considering all the complications. And I wouldn't get back a real thing anyway. Like, there is no going back in that sense. And besides, I never liked having a penis, so in that sense, I'm okay living without it. It doesn't bother me.
We don't have to talk about it for like a long time, but can you give just kind of a brief explanation of sort of why you transitioned in the first place and sort of what your feelings were about that, and then maybe later about sort of coming to the realization that that was not the thing for you?
Right. So I don't think I'm gonna go into like details because it's a really, really long story. But well, you could say there are three main components, like three reasons for why I transitioned. And the first one is that I had a very strong dislike towards my own genitalia since I was very young, maybe like 4 years old. Right. I associated my own genitals with death, because I was thinking a lot about death when I was a little kid. I don't think most kids should be thinking about that at that age, but you can thank my grandma who exposed me to some stuff I shouldn't have seen. Yeah, I had like very, very negative relation towards my own body at that point. And on top of that, I was like, I never was like stereotypically masculine, like far, far from it. And just, I had like some experiences that were not like typical for a boy. Like, I would paint my nails when I was 8. And when I was 9, I was pretending to be a wife of one of my classmates. Right.
That's cute.
Yeah, it is cute. I look back at it, it's like, it's a normal child behavior. I don't think we should be pathologizing things like that at all. And for me, another thing is, I grew up in a very like conservative and homophobic environment that was, had this prevalent macho culture to it. And if you're a guy who just doesn't fit into that mold, you're going to have a pretty hard time. On top of that, I also did hit puberty later than others. So I was like smaller, and I looked like a kid. And, that made me target for a lot of bullies. And I was bullied, well, mostly because I was being too feminine, right? And the third thing is, yeah, before I go there, the things I was told was that like I could never be a real man, or that I would never get a girlfriend, things like that, and that affected me on a really, really, really bad level. And I started thinking that being a man is not something I can possibly ever live up to. Even though, looking back at it now, I'm like, well, I don't think there is such a thing as a right way to being a man. But at the time, there was only one type of masculinity I was being exposed to. I was thinking like, this is how I was supposed to behave, but it was just so unnatural for me, right? And it felt like I was given these shoes that I can't possibly fill. And so I was thinking like, well, wouldn't it be better if I was born a woman? And yeah, perhaps it would be. I mean, I get along with women much better than with men in general. Like I'm just hanging around women and queer guys. Like like you don't see me hanging around straight men unless I have to. And I think I still have. Well, I wouldn't say I hate straight men, because I care about them in a way. I think men's mental health is very, very important. But personally, I think I still have like some prejudice against straight men from my upbringing. So I don't always feel comfortable around them, And
it's this feeling of like, like I have sympathy for you and less of your issues, but you can deal with them away from me.
Yeah, I mean, I can empathize with a tiger who has like a pain in his foot.
Yeah,
but I'm not going to go in there and massage his foot.
That's for someone else.
No, thank you. Yeah, just keep you at distance. So the third thing is that when I did hit puberty, I had like a pathologically high sex drive, which is not normal. And it's normal for a lot of teenagers to have like crazy sex drives. Mine was so bad that I would masturbate for 8 to 11 hours a day. I had developed like blisters, I was bleeding, I was ejaculating blood, all of that. But at the same time, I had such a bad dysphoria towards my genitals that I didn't even go to a doctor with it.
Right.
Because I didn't want anyone to look at me down there, right? And
even just discussing sexuality at all with an adult at that age is probably really hard.
Absolutely. So I was terrified about it. So if people ask me, do you miss your penis? Well, if I remember how bloody and blistered it looked, hell no. It was like stuff of a horror film, So, all those things combined, I was like, well, I hated my sexuality. I sort of wanted to escape it. And transition was, in a way, a method of escaping that sexuality. And at the same time feeling like I could be more accepted by society. And like I didn't transition to like feel special or anything like that. It was to feel more normal, to just fit in. Like I could fit more into that specific role. And like my hands, like I have a very small feminine hands, and ever since I was very young, people were always commenting on that, just how feminine your hands are, and I hated that. And it's not because I hated my hands, I have nothing against them, I liked them actually, but it's the very fact that people comment on that and like so much focus on that. I hated that. So when I transitioned, like no one was saying that, and that was such a relief. Like they're not feminine hands, they're just hands. And that was cool. And when I detransitioned, people started saying that same thing. I'm like, oh, for fuck's sake.
Right.
Can I swear on this podcast?
Oh, yeah. You can swear as much as you want.
It's fucking great.
It's for adults, and if it's...
Oh.
We swear. It's me and Luca. We swear all the time, so it could not be a rule.
No,
so
I'm like that too. So yeah.
But yeah, it's really interesting that you say that. I had this experience where I feel like before I transitioned, it's like people would like always point out, at least when I was, like maybe 14, 15, that age, like all of the ways in which like my body was masculine or like not feminine, but then like the moment, but now like transphobic will try to do like the exact opposite, but with like the same issues. So it's like this way where you're just like getting both messages. You're just like going from like, oh, you're sort of being told you can't be sort of a proper woman in some way, and then those same people are like, no, you're not a man because you're too feminine, kind of.
Okay. Well, I see absolutely nothing feminine about you, to be honest.
I think
I mean, like in the sense, like if I met you like on the street, I didn't know who you were. Like, yeah, my brain would automatically think it's a guy, a very handsome guy.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. Now we're sitting here. I mean, the only thing that's missing is some chains and whips.
But yeah, no, I think. But a lot of the time, I think it's not even necessarily about pointing out something real. I think some people get really just obsessed with people who are gender nonconforming at all, and the concept of gender nonconformity, or people who are trans, or in your case, like detrans. And so they have this sort of list of things that are like feminine or masculine, and they kind of go through it and just attach it to that person, even though if they didn't know that person was trans or detrans, they wouldn't have noticed.
Yeah, it's like you automatically fish for those characteristics, yeah.
And you sort of see them a lot. But of course, if you start doing that, then you can also just start seeing it in other people. So I've had sort of several of my partners who are cis men just be presumed to be trans, or people have like misunderstood, and having people be like, oh, I always knew that you were born female, but it's like a cis guy. But like they're convinced that they can see it because they're sort of now they're looking at it. And if people are not like obviously gender non-conforming, then if people are not like obviously gender conforming in not just their way of being, but in their sort of body, then it's easy to find signs if you're looking for them.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's, you know, you have people who say that they could always be able to tell a trans woman from a biological woman, you know, and there's probably a lot of people they pass on the street that they had no idea were trans.
Oh yeah. It's such that's huge confirmation bias as well, right? Because you know, if you don't know it, then you won't know it either.
Yeah, I think there was a video of, I don't know, when it was 4 years ago, and I think it was Blair White. She was like out on the street with a biological woman, and they were asking which one of us is trans, and I think the results people gave was like very 50-50. Yeah, actually. So I think that's really interesting, you know.
Yeah. It's hard, but I mean, even for me, I think you know, if you've been in the trans community for a while, then you start getting better maybe at like looking for sort of seeing if someone is trans, even if they obviously pass very well. But even then, it's like it's never a surefire thing. Like I have been also been just really wrong, like catastrophic, been entirely sure that like someone was trans and they just weren't, and that's just how it is.
Yeah, because it's sort of like you know, with people like recognizing whether someone is gay or not. There's this term called gaydar.
Yeah.
Right.
But then at the same time, you don't want to say that like you can never tell that someone's queer, because you can't do it with certainty. But like obviously some of us will quote unquote pass better, whether it's like trans or whether it's as straight than others. It's this very difficult thing where it's like it doesn't actually exist, but then obviously there are cultural components of queerness.
Absolutely. I remember like even when we first met back in I think 2015, 2016. Well, you thought I was female to male, wasn't it?
Yeah, I believe that, and I also like didn't think about it. It made me very confused when like someone sent me your video. I think it was before they did like an official newspaper thing about it, and I was very confused listening to it. That was my primary reaction, because I thought that you were a trans guy. And
Yeah.
I was sort of going, I was, I don't understand. What's
I
going
confused a
on?
lot of people, to be honest. Because for a long time I used to say I was intersex.
Yes,
Mostly just to avoid the feeling of shame
that's what I thought as
having
well.
transitioned
Yeah.
and detransitioned, right? And I no longer feel that shame. And for me, like coming out the way I did, it sort of was to overcome that feeling of shame, even though I wasn't expecting it to get this much attention. I wasn't expecting that at all. Uh, but I think in a way it helped me to just move on and accept what I am, what I did, because I tried to like run away from it for a long time, and but at the same time I sort of had this need to talk about it with people, but also didn't want to reveal the truth. So sort of talking about intersex conditions sort of felt like I was like almost able to talk about it with someone without revealing everything.
Because I do think we did talk about that.
Yeah, we
So
did.
that was
we
what
did actually. Yeah.
I believed as well. That was, that you were intersex and had some sort of surgery, but that like it was in your childhood, and that you were like assigned female at birth. And I don't remember exactly if you said that last part or not, but that was very much sort of the idea that I had. But do you feel like that was that because you were like living as kind of stealth when you were living as a woman and then you like detransitioned, or was it more about not wanting like was it the detransition part that you were like ashamed of first kind of, or the
Um,
trans part?
I think it was the trans part, and I was like living stealthy
Right.
as a trans woman, right? Like most people had no idea like I was trans. I remember when I went to my doctor, it was like my first appointment with that new doctor, and when I first even mentioned that I was trans, it was like, "But you look like a girl. You can't be trans."
Yeah.
It's funny, but like no, I've managed to pass somehow, mostly because I didn't develop particularly masculine, like I didn't have like strong masculine features to begin with, so it's easier, and I think it's much easier with that. I think general rule of thumb is that if you pass well without hormones, you will pass well on hormones,
Well, yeah.
obviously, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, so it was shame around transitioning, mostly because in my own environment, I was hearing a lot of negative things about trans people, right? That's the only thing I heard. They're perverts and all of that. And I don't want to be perceived as that. I mean, I literally transitioned to escape my sex drive, right? That's like the opposite, the very opposite of being a pervert. So there was definitely shame around that, and it just feels so good to move on beyond that shame. I don't think anyone should be feeling shame around, well, whether being trans or gay or detrans or anything really.
Yeah. That's actually really interesting because I haven't thought that much about like detransitioning when you're stealth, because that does add another layer to the conversation where you have to consider what you had to consider, right? Which is like, okay, well, these people don't even know that I'm trans, so if I detransition, then it's not just the detransition part. I have to disclose the trans part first, and that's a lot at the same time.
Absolutely. And I wasn't disclosing the trans part.
Yeah.
So a lot of people just assumed I was transitioning from female to male, like the first time. But it wasn't my first rodeo.
Yeah.
So, and it's not like it happened overnight. The detransition process, because I went through a long like androgynous phase in between the two.
Yeah.
So I think like in between like 2015 to 2017, I had this androgynous phase before I actually like I wouldn't say that's the point where I detransitioned, but that's where I felt more comfortable just seeing myself as a guy. And it's not that I was unhappy when I was trans. Yeah. So I don't like to say that I like regret my transition. I regret the surgery, and I think a lot of trans people who had the surgery and had really really bad complications will relate to that as well. I think regretting surgery is not something that is exclusive to detrans people. Trans people have experienced that as well, but transition itself, I think it was a very important part of my own journey of just learning about myself. So I wouldn't be the person I am today without that part of me. So, and that's another problem I have is like with the Norwegian language, there is no term for detransition.
Yeah.
So they will always say regret the surgery. And the thing is, like, people who detransition, it's a very diverse group of people who detransition for so many different reasons, right? Sure, a lot of them regret, but there's also a lot of people who do so for economic reasons. There are people who detransition because of medical health issues they had because of HRT. I have talked to several people who have taken HRT for like 20 years and have developed such bad side effects that they had to stop. Yeah, so it's not like it's just one thing, and the media will just in Norway would call it all like regret.
Yeah.
And I don't really like it. And like even with my case, there was just like this person regrets their transition. I think that's misrepresentation of my own take on this issue.
Yeah, it's. I was actually going to ask about that because angrere is often used if you're going to try to like translate detransition, but like you said, those aren't really the same thing, right? Because people can detransition for a number of different reasons, and a lot of people detransition don't necessarily feel regret, which can for some people mean like that they're actually like happy that they did what they did and happy with their body and stuff like that, or it can be instances where maybe they've sort of wished that they hadn't, but they're accepting it now. But on the other side of that as well, right, which is that like people can experience regret with regards to, for instance, specific surgeries and still not be a detransitioner. They can be happy living as trans people still in the same gender role that they're in and feel regret, for instance, having been sterilized or something like that. It's I really dislike the the Norwegian term like angrer. I think it really
it doesn't represent the whole picture, to be honest.
Do you feel like the fact that you had so many complications from your surgery was kind of the trigger for sort of that detransition process?
Oh, definitely. And I mean, still, considering that I didn't really need to transition, to be honest. Like, I could have found it very well within me to accept myself as a man if I was exposed to other ways of being a man. But the surgery definitely like helped me get there. And even though the complications suck, but it makes you think, sort of, So I started analyzing myself, looking back at it, and I remember this day very vividly when I was thinking like, I'm a feminine guy, and I think that was the moment I had that thought was the moment where there was like no going back from there. When you start thinking about it, and generally, I think it was like better for me to just accept myself instead of changing myself like that. And also I'm not the person to be going out there and telling other people what they should do. I am not the kind of person who will go to someone and tell them, "Oh, you shouldn't transition because you're gonna regret it." I think it's very individual, like from one person to another. But yeah, in my case, it's just like accepting the reality. And I also think that there is more than one way of treating gender dysphoria. And I think, for some people, and I know people who like hormones help them in that sense. But there's also a lot of people who, had good experience with therapy in a sense, like, looking at yourself and thinking of like, why am I experiencing what I'm experiencing? And is there a way I can accept myself? And I think, we shouldn't be dependent on medication. That's like my same take on like treating depression. Like, you want to treat it with antidepressants, or do you want to get to the core of the problem? And I think it's a good idea to focus on getting to the core of the problem first before you try thinking of medication.
Do you feel like you had gender dysphoria?
Well, to some degree, yes. And I think it came from two sources, sort of. One was like there to begin with, but that was just towards my genitals, not the rest of me, where I developed the other part of dysphoria is basically from like environmental factors, considering like how I grew up and bullying and all of that. So because I don't think there's like one way of acquiring that. I think it can be something you're born with, but it can also be something you actually acquire throughout your life. So for me, it was a combination of both, sort of. And I had people telling me I never had gender dysphoria because their dysphoria was like worse than mine. And I feel like the same with like autism. Like I'm on the spectrum, but someone could tell me like, you don't have autism because it's not severe autism.
Yeah. I'm not. I hear that too. I also hear people sort of saying people weren't really trans, stuff like that. I think that's almost impossible for someone outside of that person to really make like a meaning, like to say anything meaningful about, like if that person feels like descriptions of gender dysphoria or transness sort of feel genuine to them, like that's something that I relate to, feel like that's an experience that I had. Yeah, I don't think it necessarily matters that much like how they got it or how it resolved for them, on whether we should call it like gender dysphoria or whether we should call it transness. I think so that's like a separate question from like who can benefit from treatment. On that note, I'm curious if you have any sort of thoughts about how like that process or like the sort of healthcare system should be in order for people like you to sort of get the treatment that you need, or sort of not get treatment that you don't need. But that can also make sure that people like me get the treatment that I need.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I have a lot of thoughts on that. And, my take is that we should be doing anything in our power to limit the amount of cases where people regret the surgeries or transition in general or get really bad complications. But at the same time, I don't think that this goal should be like stepping on trans people's rights, right? And I think two can be done at the same time. Like, I'm all for a big reform in this country regarding like the healthcare system around like trans people in general. And I think if trans people and detransitioners work together to get that like what works best for both of us, that will be perfect. And that will be a beautiful way to build this bridge as well, because the media like represents us as being against each other. They present us as being enemies.
Yeah.
And I don't think that has to be the case. And
I think it's largely not the case, just because most detransitioners were a part of the trans community. Of course, some people do distance themselves, but
I think there's a certain group of people who have detransitioned who are really really traumatized from the whole experience, and like I think it's like you want to save others from doing that, you know, and it's a good intention. I'm not saying it is, but as a result, like they might want to feel like this whole treatment should be banned for that reason, you know, and you're not a bad person for wanting that. I understand where that comes from. I can relate to that. Trust me, and that's why, you know, I'm so glad that I'm talking about this like so many years after it happened, because I have, well, very different thought process around this issue than if I was to speak about it for some years ago.
Yeah.
You know, like you move on and you just think about it differently. But I know some people who think it should be illegal to transition at all.
Oh yeah. I've definitely seen some detransitioners that say that, for sure. But my sort of personal experience is that most detransitioners most of them just kind of detached from the trans label or from the community, but don't really become like politically active or have very strong feelings necessarily about sort of the healthcare system. And I do think that the media is incredibly sort of predatory.
Oh yeah, definitely, 100%. You know, also most detransitioners, they're not as involved in it as I am, right? Like I'm probably like the most like politically involved in the detrans stuff like in this whole country.
Oh, for sure.
Like I don't think there's anyone else who's like on my level there.
No. We would know, surely.
Yeah, I mean,
between the two of us, we would know who the person was.
I don't like competition.
Imagine if there was like there actually was a detransitioner, but like neither you nor me had like managed to like.
Well, that's what you call stealthy, right?
Yes, but then they would be very bad at like being a political detransitioner.
Yeah,
if none of us had
stealthily, I became a president. Nobody knows about it.
But yeah, do you find that to be a little bit like because that kind of also means you're kind of a representative, even though being representative is like really hard, right? Because it's like, what does that even mean?
Who am I representing exactly?
Yeah.
Right. And well, you know, like for me personally, I think like one particular group of people that are like main interest, as in who I want to reach and who I want to help, are young people with internalized homophobia, who can't accept themselves as gay and transition for that reason. You know, I think it's sad when that happens, instead of, you know, just accepting yourself. So, and I have had people sending me messages or like even commenting on my videos where like they realize that they are in that situation, and it's like, you know, you just helped someone on their way to accepting themselves as gay instead of transitioning to live as a heterosexual woman. And like, honestly, when you have done something like this, it feels like if I was to die today, I think my life would be worth something for that reason, you know. And there's meaning in that. I think it's beautiful in that sense.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Do you feel like internalized homophobia had like played a role for you personally, or
not for transitioning itself? Mostly because, you know, like when I was a teenager, I didn't feel any sort of sexual attraction towards anyone. I had intense high sex drive, but no attraction.
That sounds very frustrating.
Yeah, it is very frustrating. It's very frustrating. I don't think I started developing attraction towards people until like I was in my 20s, and I'm like exclusively sexually attracted to men. And it became even more apparent to me when I started taking testosterone in like early 2020. No, that was in 2019. I think late 2019, like before COVID. And that, you know, that's when it became very clear to me just how attracted I am to guys.
Yeah.
so it didn't play a role for me at that point. But also it could be like so deep and grooved, like in my own consciousness, that maybe it was, but I didn't even realize. I guess, like, when you hear things like, can I say the F word?
Yeah, you can say what you want.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, if you hear things like "fags deserve to die,"
Yeah.
From like from the time you're like very young, that gets to you,
Yeah.
So you could say that I was homophobic for a while, but not in like the sense that, oh, I hate gay people, I think gay people are nasty, but more like, yeah, I'm cool with gay people, but I'm not gay.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And it wasn't until very recently, actually this year, that I even like fully came to terms with that. You know, that I still like call myself bi. I don't know why I do that, but I do that all the time. Mostly because, like, if you think of my history, I have been mostly dating women, but it was when I was 13, I was told I could never get a girlfriend, and it was like, oh yeah, let me show you, right? So like, I was dating women just to prove something, in a way, and I don't do that anymore. I think it's stupid.
Yeah,
but it was.
It's a little bit different, but I totally did that too, because I felt also very strongly that a huge part of being like when I came out, a huge part of being a trans man was like being a man in a relationship with women. Like you were like more of a man if you were with women. So I was like very like called myself bisexual for like almost 10 years, and then I was like, but I don't like women though.
No, I mean, I'm like that too, and I felt that when I first detransitioned.
Yeah.
Like I should be dating women, and it was just a couple of years ago when I would like go on a date with a guy I met on the internet.
Yeah.
I was like, it was fun, it was cool. We like go to his place, make out, things like that. And I was like, you know what? I shouldn't be doing this. I should be dating a woman. So I would just end it. Like, no, sorry, I'm straight. Yeah. Like, sure, buddy, sure.
It's very straight to go on dates and make out with men, you know.
Yeah.
All the straight boys do it.
Yeah, you know.
Oh yeah, that's interesting. I mean, we don't have the time for this now, but it would be so interesting at some point to talk about like your just like dating experience and stuff like that as like a detrans man, because it's I imagine there may be actually probably is, you know, some similarities between that and like someone like me, I guess.
Absolutely. You know, there's sort of the same problem of should you disclose it or not. Right?
Yeah, it's
like that. That is exactly the same. You know, whether you're trans or detrans, it's like you can't escape it, even if you're detransitioned. And in many ways, you know, you can't really escape that at all. And that was also one of the reasons why I made the video this year about it, because I was studying occupational therapy for a while, and this practical exam we had, we needed to meet up in like our underwear. It was an anatomical exam, so you had to and then you had to like use other person's body for like anatomical purposes, not sexual purposes, study, but really? And then after your exam, you would be the model for the next student, and I was like, if I do that, everyone will know that there, you know, something is different about me. Yeah, and I dropped out. Oh no! Those studies for that reason. I was like, you know what? I'm not doing this. Fuck this shit. And that was the moment where, like, you know what? There are certain things you can't escape from. They will always follow you. And that was the main reason why shortly after I decided to just go on YouTube and do that shit. Yeah. There is something freeing about that. Oh yeah, absolutely. Like you're breaking all those chains. Yeah. Yeah. No, for sure. Just like before we go towards the end, you have made a new organization, right, for detransitioners, or planning to? Well, I did. We're waiting for the so-called organization number so we can open the bank account, because there's very little you can do as an organization without a bank account, right? So so we're waiting for that, but it exists, and the name of the organization is Trans Norge.
Mm-hmm.
And well, our goal is first and foremost to make the process of detransition easier for people, so that once you do that, you don't have to feel alone about it. And I know exactly what it was like being alone about the whole process. So to make this whole transition from trans to non-trans easier, and work to limiting the amounts of regret cases. Like, how can we reform the healthcare system, and also like building the bridge between detransitioners and trans community in general through just conversations and diplomacy first and foremost.
Yeah, that sounds good. Is it an organization? It's going to be a member organization?
Yes, it is.
So, and when you talk about detransitioners, is that going to include sort of also like, is it mostly people who sort of no longer see themselves as trans or going back to their, assigned gender at birth? Or is it also an organization for, say, like trans people who are like medically detransitioning and stuff like that?
Well, I think it's for all detransitioners. So like, no matter what is the reason for your detransition, this organization got like something for you in it. Whether you're detransitioning for social or socioeconomic reasons, or is it because of regret? It's about that. I think we also, want to help people who have had complications due to surgeries.
Yeah.
In my case, well, regarding complications, I feel it to this day, because I can't run without feeling any pain. I can't really lift anything heavy without getting pain. I feel like a 70-year-old man in a 30-year-old body.
Yeah.
And it sucks. It limits your life, your possibilities in many ways.
Yeah, it is. I read a little bit, about your case, and it seems to me like you've also been very unlucky, but in terms of your complications, and of course that's horrible. It does a lot with your quality of life, like regardless of regret. Just having those kinds of complications are in themselves a very, in many ways, traumatizing experience.
Yeah, and I know people who have had worse complications than me.
Yeah.
So it wasn't that bad with my case, to be honest, compared to some other stories out there.
And unfortunately, there's not a lot to do about it. I've had a couple of cases like that. These were, not detrans people, just, trans people who were very unlucky. And in some cases, I would say got sort of maltreatment, where they did something wrong with the surgery, and they made some wrong decisions. And I tried to help them sort of make complaints. But it's a very long process, and then sort of nothing.
Bureaucracy at work.
And nothing happens. So all you get back from, sort of Rikshospitalet is the only ones in Norway that do bottom surgery, but just sort of getting a response or getting any admission that like anything wrong was done, or even or any form of economic compensation and stuff like that it's way too hard, and it takes way too long, and it's sort of not accessible at all. So I hope that they listen, and that people can get help if they have a lot of complications, including compensation if that's what they need. So last thing before we stop, if there's anyone who is like listening to this and who are wondering if maybe they're a detransitioner, maybe they're considering starting that process, is there like any advice that you would give to them, or any questions that they could ask themselves that you think might have helped you?
Sure. Take your time and think it through. I don't think it's a decision that should be taken lightly. And, I mean, it's a decision that affects your entire life from now on. So I know it can feel at sometimes that you should be at hurry, especially if you're transitioning from male to female, because masculine characteristics develop fast, and you might be thinking like, if I detransition later, I would never be able to pass as much as I was if I was younger. But I think, like, I would recommend people to become their own therapists. And I think if you have the ability to do that, you might actually be better at it than the actual therapists out there. If you like truly look at your whole life and trying to look at it from a neutral lens, because I think it is the case a lot of the time when you're thinking like, oh, I might be trans, you're sort of starting to look for the signs, right? Like, oh, I did this when I was a kid, so it means I must be a trans. And that was the case for me, like with this story of me painting my nails when I was 8. And I think a lot of people who think they have a certain diagnosis, whether it's bipolar or autism or borderline or anything, will do something similar when you look at those signs and you think like, okay, it means I have this. And it's very hard to be neutral about it because you have like your own bias, right? And so did I, in many ways. Meditate. I think that can help one to look at things like in an unbiased light. Actually, it's just like sort of disconnect from the ego in that sense.
Yeah. Thank you so much, and yeah, thank you for coming.
Yeah, it was a pleasure.